Okay, let's dive into something that feels, well, incredibly foundational. An instruction that echoes,
Hmm.
um, not just through history, but across different kinds of relationships.
Yeah, we're talking about honoring father figures.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, we're looking at a specific piece of source material. It's a sermon called Honor Thy Father by Dr. Bobby Allen.
That's right. And it really anchors itself in two pretty powerful scriptures, Exodus 20.1 and 1 John 3.1.
So our goal here really is to take this sermon, these scriptures, and sort of unpack what it's laying out. We want to pull out the most significant insights for you, the listener.
Looking at what it means to honor, both a divine father figure and an earthly one, at least from this particular perspective.
And there's that fascinating promise tied to it that we need to explore too.
Absolutely. And the sermon's starting point is key, I think. It really sets the stage saying, look, all honor ultimately begins with God. It flows from him and to him.
So understanding how to honor our Heavenly Father, that's step one.
That's the idea presented. It's the necessary foundation.
Okay, let's start there then. The source gives, what, 4 specific reasons why we honor God as our Heavenly Father. What's the first one?
The first one highlighted is God as creator,
Hmm.
referencing Genesis 1.27, that God created us in his own image.
Right.
The point is, he formed us, fashioned us, breathed life into us. So the insight is, well, it's simple but deep. Because he's the source of our being, we owe him worship, we owe him honor.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
You honor the artist because of the masterpiece, right?
Yeah.
So what's next?
He's our provider. The source uses James 1.17. Every good and perfect gift is from above.
Hmm.
And it really challenges your perspective. You might think, oh, my job provides for me. But the sermon's angle is, actually, it's God who gives the ability, the opportunity.
The strength, even the clarity of mind to do the job.
Exactly. Every good thing, when you trace it back, is presented as a gift from him.
That really reframes things, doesn't it? Okay, so creator, provider. What about protector?
Yeah, this is a powerful point in the sermon. It references Psalm 56.1. God is a refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble.
Okay.
And it contrasts this with earthly fathers. However good they might be, they can fail, they can leave.
Right, that's reality.
But God, as our heavenly Father, the source emphasizes, he never leaves, he never forsakes. The sermon even uses that intimate Aramaic term, Abba.
Like daddy.
Exactly. Describing this close, unfailing protector who fights for us, heals us, covers us. It's a very comforting image presented there.
That contrast between a potentially fallible human father and an unfailing divine one, that
Yeah.
feels like a really crucial part of this perspective. And the fourth reason.
Redeemer. This is where the source really digs into God's love and mercy, using Romans 5.8.
While we were still sinners, Christ died for us.
Precisely.
Yeah.
The sermon poses this pretty striking question. What kind of father sees his children lost, rejecting him, and then sends his own son to die to redeem them, to buy them back?
Yeah.
It's presented as the ultimate act of loving sacrifice, of demonstrating mercy.
So these 4 pillars, creator, provider, protector, redeemer. That's how the source frames honoring our Heavenly Father.
Right. And then, importantly, it turns it back to the listener. It asks you to reflect. Are you living in a way that honors your Heavenly Father?
Immediately making it practical. Not just theology, but how does it look day to day?
Exactly. How does that understanding translate into action?
Okay, so now shifting gears a bit. From the divine to the human, the source zooms in on that commandment in Exodus 20.12.
Honor your father and your mother,
Yeah.
so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you.
And the sermon highlights something specific about this commandment, doesn't it?
It really does. It calls it the first commandment with a promise. That's a direct quote emphasized. God literally ties a tangible blessing, longevity, long life directly to honoring your parents.
Wow. Okay, that connection. Honoring parents and how long you live. That puts a different kind of weight on it, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It shows how significant God considers this relationship.
So how does the source say we do that? How does honoring an earthly father actually look, according to this sermon?
It breaks it down, right?
It does, kind of by stages of life. Initially, especially when you're young, it emphasizes obedience. It points to Ephesians 6.1.
Children, obey your parents.
In the Lord, for this is right. The idea presented is that an obedient child contributes to peace and reflects God's intended order in the home.
Okay, that makes sense for childhood. But obviously that dynamic changes as you become an adult. How does honor look then?
Well, it shifts more towards respect. Proverbs 23.22 is used. Listen to your father. Do not despise your mother when she is old.
Hmm.
And the sermon makes a crucial point here. Even if you don't always agree with your parents, maybe you see their flaws more clearly as an adult.
Mm.
Respect for their role, for their effort, is still essential.
Respect even in disagreement. That feels like a really important and sometimes challenging part of honoring parents when you're grown up.
It really is. And the sermon acknowledges that complexity.
Mm.
Tied very closely to respect is gratitude.
Gratitude. Yeah, which the source says should be constant. It actually asks, when was the last time you genuinely said, "Thank you, Dad"?
Oof, good question.
And what stands out here is the nuance. The sermon encourages honoring the role and the effort. It suggests thanking God for the man in that position, even if, and it says this explicitly, even if he fell short.
So, honoring the position, the attempt, kind of separate from the performance, in a way.
That's the idea presented. It's about recognizing the significance of that role and the effort made, regardless of imperfections.
That distinction, that feels like it could be incredibly freeing for people with, let's say, complicated father relationships. What about when a father isn't around anymore?
The sermon talks about legacy. For fathers who've passed on, honor comes through living out the good lessons they taught.
Carrying things forward.
Exactly. Carrying forward their love, their values, passing on their wisdom. It's about making sure their positive impact continues.
So, according to this source, obedience when young, respect as adults, gratitude always, and carrying on a legacy if they're gone.
That sums up the practical ways presented.
And just like with the Heavenly Father section, the sermon turns it back to you, the listener, asking directly, have you expressed your gratitude and respect to the father figures in your life?
Keeps bringing it back to that personal reflection, doesn't it? What are you going to do about this?
Yeah. But the sermon also tackles, pretty courageously, I think, that really tough question. What about fathers who are absent or even abusive?
Right. And this is where the sermon offers a message of hope, really. It directs the listener back to God. It cites Psalm 68.5.
A father to the fatherless.
Is God in his holy dwelling? The assertion is where an earthly father failed, the heavenly Father prevails. He steps into that gap.
That's a potentially life-changing message for someone who's carried that pain. And the sermon talks about forgiveness here too, right? In this really difficult context.
It does. It presents forgiveness as, interestingly, an act of honor, but, and this is crucial, that clarifies it doesn't honor the sin or the dysfunction.
Okay, that's an important distinction.
Definitely. Instead, forgiveness is framed as your choice to honor God by refusing to let bitterness take root. And the key line here, which is really powerful, is forgiveness sets you free.
So it's not primarily about the other person, it's about your own liberation from resentment.
That's the perspective offered. It's a gift you give yourself, releasing that burden.
That reframing, that's a significant takeaway. And again, a question for personal reflection from the source. Is there a place in your heart where healing still needs to happen between you and your father?
It really prompts an honest look, doesn't it? At maybe old wounds and the potential for seeking God's healing.
So as we move towards the sermon's conclusion, it talks about the results, the benefits of living this way. It summarizes the blessing of honor by saying, honor brings increase.
Yes, exactly. Honor brings increase.
Yeah.
And it lists some specific blessings linked in the sermon to honoring God and your father. Things like walking in wisdom, inheriting a kind of spiritual covering or protection, receiving the blessing of favor, and circling back that promise of length of days from Exodus.
So honor isn't just presented as a duty, but as a pathway to actually receiving good things.
That's the connection made. The action leads to positive outcomes.
And the sermon uses probably the most powerful example possible for this, Jesus himself.
Absolutely. Jesus as the perfect model, honoring his heavenly Father in absolutely everything, even submitting his will in the garden.
Not my will, but yours be done. Luke 22.42.
Exactly. Total alignment and honor.
And even, think about this. While literally dying on the cross, he's still thinking about honoring his earthly mother, making sure John would care for her.
Right. Such a poignant moment. And the sermon uses these examples to drive home the point. If Jesus, the Son of God, prioritized honoring both his heavenly Father and his earthly parent in these profound ways,
how much more should we?
That's the concluding challenge there. It sets a high standard, but one shown to be achievable through his example.
So this whole deep dive into Dr. Allen's sermon kind of brings us full circle. The idea that earthly fatherhood at its best is meant to mirror God's heart, however imperfectly.
And the source even includes this really heartfelt nod to fathers acknowledging those who tried, who stayed, prayed, worked, sacrificed.
And it generously includes those who maybe didn't quite know how to do it well.
Yeah, it's quite encompassing. And then, flowing from all this, the sermon lands on some very clear practical calls to action for you, the listener.
Okay, what are they?
First, a direct challenge. Thank your earthly father today.
Oh,
Well, maybe it's a call, a visit, maybe it's just a prayer for him. Or if it's relevant, maybe today's the day to start thinking about forgiveness.
okay, that's tangible. What else?
Second, worship your heavenly Father daily. And the emphasis is this isn't just about saying the right words, but about living your life in a way that genuinely shows honor, living it out.
Right. Actions
Right.
speak louder. And the third,
The third is a powerful charge specifically to fathers. Rise up. Be the example, the protector, the leader God calls you to be.
and there was a poignant line attached to that, wasn't there?
There was. It closes that point saying, your children are watching, and heaven is cheering you on.
Wow. That's motivating.
It is. And the source also touches on prayer, asking God to teach us how to honor, to bless fathers, heal broken hearts, restore relationships, and ultimately reflect his glory.
It really covers a lot of ground, doesn't it? From the big divine purpose down to the very personal, very human experience.
Yeah, it takes this foundational commandment and just explores all these different facets and how they impact our most important relationships with God and with family.
Offering both, deep insights and actual practical steps you can take. So maybe a final thought to leave with everyone, building on this source. How does your own experience, your own practice of honoring the earthly father figures in your life, how does that maybe reflect or influence or even shape how you understand and practice honoring your Heavenly Father?
And maybe the other way around, too. How does your understanding of God as Father shape how you approach honoring the earthly ones?
Thinking about that interplay, that back and forth, might reveal some surprising things for you.
Definitely something to ponder.
Well, thank you for sharing the source material that let us take this deep dive today. It's given us a lot to think about.